What would you do if the person you just humiliated impulsively turned out to be someone whose power is above yours? And what if that uncontrolled action not only costs you your job, but forces you to face your darkest prejudices? The dim light from the airplane corridor filtered through the windows, creating a calm and relaxed atmosphere, only interrupted by the soft murmur of the passengers. Everything seemed in order on the flight, a long journey from Madrid to New York, with the airline staff working with their usual precision. But something wasn't right. In one of the seats, a dark-skinned, elegant, and well-dressed woman was checking her phone, oblivious to the surroundings. Her face reflected fatigue, but her eyes shone with a determination that made her seem indestructible, as if everything around her was just a distraction. It wasn't the first time she traveled in business class, but that morning, something unsettled her. A few steps away, the flight attendant, Marta, was walking down the aisle offering drinks and checking the comfort of the passengers. She had worked for the same airline for years, but recently she had felt strange, as if the world was slipping through her fingers. She had started to develop a disconnection with the people crossing her path. Something in her attitude was changing. The growing frustration with her job and personal difficulties were making her feel more irritable. As she passed by the woman's seat, Marta noticed that the woman had her headphones on, completely immersed in her phone. This, in some way, made the flight attendant feel a slight annoyance, as if her presence was being ignored. Marta stopped right next to her. "Ma'am, would you like something to drink?" she asked in a tone that didn't seem as kind as usual. The woman looked up and, with a forced smile, nodded. Although Marta expected a quick and grateful response, the woman, without taking off her headphones, gestured with her hand for a glass of wine. The flight attendant, feeling that her service had not been appreciated, felt snubbed. "Are you listening or not?" Marta asked, this time with a louder, almost challenging tone. The woman, surprised by the bluntness, looked up, now frowning. Their eyes met, and the tension became palpable in the air. The flight attendant couldn't help but notice the unshakable calm on the woman's face, a calm that made her feel even more irritated. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" the passenger said with a calm voice, but she wasn't willing to give in to the rudeness Marta was exuding. Something clicked in that moment for Marta. The accumulated frustration of the last few months exploded without warning. Without thinking any further, she raised her hand and, in a burst of rage, slapped the woman hard across the face. The sound of the hand hitting the cheek resonated down the aisle, and several nearby passengers fell silent, shocked by what they had just witnessed. The woman, stunned, did not react immediately. Her face remained still, but something gleamed in her eyes. Not fear, but a contained fury. Marta, realizing what she had just done, felt her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back. The blood rushed to her head, and discomfort settled in her chest like a heavy stone. The murmurs among the passengers began to grow. Some were visibly concerned, while others watched with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Marta was lost, unable to find the words to apologize. How had she let her emotions get the best of her like that? The woman slowly stood up from her seat. The air in the plane became dense, as if the oxygen itself had become heavy. Her eyes shone with a mixture of anger and something deeper, something not immediately recognizable. As if what had just happened was only the tip of the iceberg. "Do you think what you've done is okay?" the woman asked, her voice serene, but carrying an intensity that made Marta shrink. It was a question she hadn't expected, one that didn't have a simple answer. In that moment, Marta felt her life was out of control, that her frustration and rage had consumed her, leading her to an action she couldn't regret but didn't fully understand. The woman looked at her for a long moment, and with an unsettling calm, walked away, heading toward the back of the plane. Unknowingly, she had left behind a chaos that was only beginning to take shape. And in that unsettling silence, Marta stood there, motionless, wondering if she would ever understand the weight of what she had just done. Marta watched as the woman walked toward the back of the plane, her elegant and proud figure moving with a calmness that only increased the discomfort Marta felt inside. In her mind, the images repeated themselves. The slap, the woman's face, the murmurs of the passengers. It felt as though everything was falling apart around her. Yet, the rage still bubbled in her chest. Marta couldn't stop thinking about how the woman had snubbed her at first. Why such a cold attitude? Why the indifference toward the effort she put into her work, as if it weren't enough? Her frustration was blinding her, and, unable to stop it, the words escaped her mouth. "You're probably not used to being spoken to like that, are you?" she muttered under her breath, barely audible to the nearby passengers. Then, her thoughts darkened, filled with resentment. Over the years, Marta had witnessed what she perceived as an air of superiority among some people who didn't share her background. Those who seemed to have it all and who, in her eyes, could never understand the real struggle. In a thoughtless impulse, filled with contempt, the words left her mouth like poison. "What do you expect with that grandeur attitude? As if it were normal for someone like you. Do you understand?" The words echoed in the air like a bitter sting, full of hate and an unsustainable judgment. It was a release for everything Marta felt, but she didn't realize she was sinking even further. She didn't think about the implications of what she had just said, only about the rage that had finally found an outlet. The woman, who had been walking calmly toward the back, stopped abruptly upon hearing those words. Her shoulders tensed, and her breathing grew deeper, as if she were controlling an anger that wouldn't be easily subdued. With an almost terrifying calmness, she slowly turned toward Marta. Without hurry, she walked back down the aisle, this time locking eyes with the flight attendant in a way that exuded a strength Marta wasn't prepared to face. "Do you really think your words can teach me lessons on grandeur?" the woman said, her tone serene but dead-on precise. Marta tried to respond, but shame had already begun to invade her. It wasn't just the slap that haunted her now. It was what she had just said, what she had spoken without considering the consequences, what was now burning in her throat. The woman, advancing until she stood directly in front of her, held Marta's gaze as though she were looking beyond her skin, her words, her frustration. "What you just said is not just racism, Marta," she said without raising her voice, as if revealing a painful truth. "It's ignorance. It's the reflection of a world that has failed you and that you've decided to take out on others. But I assure you, I haven't done it." Those words, deeply fair and painfully clear, left Marta speechless, unable to defend herself, not knowing how to react. Her body trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a sensation that something inside her had broken. Something she had never seen so clearly before that moment. The woman stood there, staring at her for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Then, without saying another word, she turned around and went back to her seat, leaving Marta with the feeling that she had touched an irreparable point. The flight attendant stood in the aisle, her heart pounding hard, not knowing how to face the whirlwind of emotions she had unleashed. The woman's words echoed in her mind, louder with each passing moment, but she had no way of stopping the flow of thoughts. Her anger had blinded her, and now she was paying the price of a lesson she wasn't ready to learn. The flight continued on its course, but for Marta, time seemed to have stopped. The murmurs of the passengers were no longer an annoyance. They had become a distant echo that barely reached her ears. The only thing she could hear was the pounding of her own heart, a wild beat that seemed to fill every corner of the plane. As the flight progressed, Marta couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words. Ignorance, a reflection of a world that has failed you. The flight attendant found herself trapped in an internal battle, a struggle between the anger that still simmered in her chest and the sadness that began to form in her stomach. The woman's words, so calm and profound, had touched something inside her that she didn't understand. But there was no turning back from what she had done. It was no longer just a slap. It was the racism she had distilled with her words, the contempt hidden beneath the frustration of her personal life, the desperation she had tried to hide for years. Marta didn't know how to fix what had happened, nor how she would face what was to come. The rest of the flight passed in an uncomfortable silence for her. She couldn't look at the passengers who were watching her with distrust, nor even the crew members who, though they didn't dare to say anything, shared furtive glances among themselves. Shame consumed her, And with each passing second on that plane, she felt the distance between herself and the rest of the world grow bigger and bigger. When the plane finally landed, Marta felt a lump in her throat. She knew that when she left, she wouldn't be the same person who had boarded the plane. And even though the woman she had clashed with had already left, something still weighed in the air. As Marta gathered her things and headed toward the exit, a feeling of helplessness completely overtook her. The woman had been right. Frustration shouldn't be taken out on others. And although anger had blinded her, the worst part was that, in the end, she hadn't realized that the deepest wound wasn't the one she had inflicted on the woman, but the one she had caused herself, allowing racism and hate to take over her life. When she stepped off the plane, the passengers had already dispersed, but Marta lingered for a few more seconds by the exit door, staring into the void. She knew that, in some way, she had hit rock bottom, something that would take her a long time to repair, but something she couldn't forget. And in that moment, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe, just maybe, this had been the beginning of a change. The woman she had slapped would never know it, but that small action had been the start of an awakening that Marta hadn't expected. From that point on, her life would change forever, although she didn't yet know how. She could only hope that time would help her heal the wounds she hadn't even realized she had.